All right.
Hey there, Adeo here. Why don't we go down and just do some intros? Right now we've got 20 people online. Is that right? That's great. So I'm Adeo, CEO of the Founder Institute. Mike, you want to go next?
So I'm Mike. I run all of our graduate initiatives here at the Founder Institute. And on top of that, I run all of our product development as well. So I manage our new website, if you've seen the new fi.co. And prior to doing this, I've launched 6 different apps as well. So I've got quite a bit of experience in product management.
Last but not least, BB.
Hi, I'm BB. I'm founder of Codastra. We do extreme web and software development. And yeah.
And we got Drew over here, who you can't see on screen. He's going to be helping answer questions. So here's the deal, guys. We're going to be talking about managing developers, particularly remote developers, and what. But you know, of course, if you're managing a developer, whether they're remote or otherwise, you're going to have issues managing developers. So it's a little bit of both, but mainly remote developers. How we do this is our goal here is so you got the CEO, someone who's been a CEO and manages developers currently, someone else who's a CEO and a developer. And I guess all 3 of us are also developers as well. So this is about as good a group as you're going to get to help answer your questions with remote development. What I'd like to do, though, is we're here to answer your questions. So we're going to go over some stuff, and you're going to get the courage to start asking questions. Drew is monitoring the questions. Drew, if you want to welcome everyone and just remind them to type questions. So you're going to notice on the right-hand side, you have a dashboard. It says chat, users, etc. I already see some questions coming in. Just type your questions into that chat area and we'll try to get to them. So why don't we just kick it off? You know, there's so many different things when it comes to managing remote developers. I'm going to kind of go off script here while everyone gets warmed up. And I'm assuming for the most part that people have chosen their developer. They may already be working with them. What are some of the best practices, you know, before you even get into specification or anything like that, to communicate with the developers? Like, I know we use Slack. You work with other quote-unquote clients besides us. So why don't you talk to me about some of the best practices with communication to get started?
So these days, the best tool I've seen is Slack. I mean, most of our clients use Slack, and we find it to be extremely helpful. And there are a couple of clients who also use Google Chat or Hangouts.
Gchat, yeah, Hangouts.
But because of legacy reasons, they have been working at their client.
Does anyone use Skype anymore?
Not many, very, very few.
Right. So it's basically everyone's communicating with their remote developers vis-a-vis Slack, and that's because it plugs into GitHub and other both code repositories, task managers, and bug trackers, right?
Yes.
So out of curiosity, so they're using Slack and using these tie-ins, and maybe like what are some common other tools that people use, and what's the communication frequency that you see?
So communication frequency depends on the technical expertise of the client. So if the client is already technically good, so we generally tend to have a daily meeting, so kind of a daily sprint, because they actually get what we are doing, and we can discuss and we can iterate on a daily basis if needed. But when it comes to a client who is not that much into technicalities and he's more of a product guy, we tend to have weekly iterations, so we have weekly meeting. And of course, we are always in Slack for all the discussions. But when it's scheduled meetings, it's weekly.
Do you normally operate on a 2-week sprint methodology?
So when it comes to really early stage startups, we work on a 1-week sprint. But for a bit more mature startups, it's 2 week sprints.
Okay, so let's go through this. Primary tool is Slack. Other tools vary widely. You're communicating in some cases daily if the client's very technical, weekly if they're less technical, and for early stage startups, you're working on sprints, which is product completion progress on about a 1 week basis, maybe 2 weeks if they're slightly more mature.
And what I want to add to that too, that I think is critical, is making sure that you get on a.
That's someone saying they can't hear us. Can everyone hear their problems fixed? Okay.
All right. So yeah. So another thing is getting on basically a regular meeting schedule. I think is very, very critical, particularly with folks that are remote, because there might be only a certain amount of overlap that you have with those folks, and you want to make sure that you get everything going really well so that they can kind of set up their next day. So I think that's also really important. Another thing that's important is to have some form of a project management tool. So here in-house we use Asana. A lot of other people like using Trello, for example, as tools, so that you can kind of see how the project is moving forward, and you can update that as well. And then of course, GitHub. Naturally, you need to have GitHub so you can make sure that you can have a code repository that you can basically revert back and forth and so on. And then also you can kind of see what everyone's doing, how everybody's doing, and how they're progressing, and you can actually take a look and evaluate their code as well. So
GitHub, Asana, and Slack are what we use. We highly recommend them. I mean, they're basically free, right? At GitHub, you pay for if you use a commercial repository, but it's like $5. Asana is free to I think 20 people, and Slack is you only pay for if you do a certain number of integrations, or you want to keep your messages forever, neither of which we've needed to do. So
sure, exactly. So getting on but the thing is that you got to get on a regular meeting schedule. Otherwise, if you don't establish this, then your engineering team might get blocked on certain issues, and then you have to wait basically till the day after or the day after for that to get fixed, and that gets compounded over multiple days at a time, right? So they can literally go to exponential if you don't answer the questions as soon as it's timely as possible. From your perspective, how do you see that working? Okay.
That's very true. I mean, I completely agree with what you said. I have nothing else to add to the point.
Right. Well, so okay, we got getting questions coming in again. Go to the right, and I'm sort of walking through sequentially. So you're setting up a relationship. You're in communication. One of the questions that came in, which is, how do you handle contracts, payments? Do you accept payments by milestone or hour? So even before you have these communication protocols that we just walked through and tools, you're going to have some sort of contractual relationship. So if you're not working with a developer already remotely and you're looking to bring one on, maybe before we go into the best contracting things, it might be worth talking a little bit about the kinds of things you bring a remote developer on for. Generally speaking, you want to try to insource as much as possible, but depending on the type of company you are, of course, right? So a lot of times we see people outsource, in some cases, a whole MVP, right, just to get started. But a lot of times it will be a piece of something they need, whether it be, a mobile app and they're building the web app, or it could be an algorithm that they're having trouble with, something of that nature. And then in terms of how they pay for it, whether it be by the hour, weekly, or by project,
that's totally dependent on the actual project, right? And it depends where you are. Sometimes you may hire a remote developer to do a certain piece. For example, connect with the Stripe API is a very defined and set project, and then you can basically spec it out for that particular project. If the project is longer, say the project is a month project or multi-month project, then there's basically two ways to do it. One is to basically compensate people based on deliveries. So you deliver this part, and this part, and this part, and this is why it's important to work with folks and get when we're going to talk about project specifications and all that in a minute. But that's why it's important to have a very good spec so that you can essentially kind of break it out into different milestones. And then the last component is if you're going to work with somebody long term, looking at 6 months, a year-long relationship, then at that point it becomes hourly, essentially. And the industry has more or less been standardized on those requirements as well.
If you trust someone, then you should work with them probably hourly, with few exceptions. I mean, from a startup perspective, it's a lot better to know, hey, I'm gonna get what I need for X amount of money. But what ends up happening is, if you could probably sometimes get it for less work and save money, and that happens in an hourly situation. Or what worse happens is it ends up being more work, and so the developer or the vendor is very upset and they kind of do a bad job, and that's even worse. So you're kind of in a no-win situation with the fixed price stuff. I would say if you have a very good specification and it's not very large, so if you wanted to add a piece of JavaScript to your current website and you didn't know how to do it, and it maybe was pretty well-known couple-week thing, fixed price is fine. It's not a long project, not very complicated. You're asking someone to build an entire mobile app from scratch that ties into back-end databases, all this kind of stuff. You know, you're venturing, no matter how good your specification is, into the unknown, and like you're going to be the one taking the risk, because if it doesn't come out the way that you want, you're going to be they're going to sandbag the work later on. And I don't know if you want to add anything on that, because that's super important.
Yes, coming to that, when the specifications are very clear, I think you can afford to go on a delivery or milestone-based relationship. But oftentimes what we see with startups is things keep changing. If not a major pivot, even small pivots keep changing. So the scope or the specs keep changing. So in that particular case, a milestone-based is not a good idea. It's like going on a waterfall model rather than being agile.
Yeah, again, so known project, not a lot of time, very clear specs, fixed price, that's fine. Otherwise, you know, build a good trusting relationship with your developer, work on a variable price, but then you really do have to manage things consciously and intently. Some other questions have been coming in. Do you want to add anything?
I was just going to say, a good place to get started is to do a test project initially. That way you can kind of see what the communication style is like. And that's essentially what you're evaluating the most. You're evaluating communication, because if you don't have clear communication, then it's going to be very difficult for you to get things delivered on time. So you want to make sure that you're spending the time to kind of figure out kind of what this relationship is going to look like. So what we generally recommend is, you know, a multi-week project as a start, just so that you can see that this is a good fit for both sides. And then once you're at that level, then what I recommend you do is, and I think this is probably a really good next topic, is to talk about like project specifications, creating a very clear project specification. And this is something that you want to ideally create together in a collaborative function with your developer if you have built that relationship. So maybe we could start there. You know, BV, like in your, you know, what are some, what's the type of information that you generally like to see in like project specifications, documents?
To get started, first of all, I mean, where we start is like the higher level overview of what needs to be done. But in addition to that, if we can have some prototypes already ready, that would be extremely beneficial in addition to just listing down, this is what I would like to do. So coming to this point, what I would say, I would always recommend my clients to first do a paper prototyping, test it with their potential customers, and then they get to see a lot of changes there. So with that, there are two advantages. The first thing is that you get to have more clarity about what you need. So if there is some change required, so you don't have to do a pivot at a point of time. And yeah, I mean, I said both of them. The first thing is you get better specs, and second is you are going to avoid any unforeseen pivots at a later point of time.
Right. So keep the questions coming in the chat, by the way. We're logging them in sequence. So we did an overview with communication. Someone has to just remind them of what the tools we mentioned in that overview. We talked about Slack, we talked about GitHub, and we talked about Asana as 3 tools. But now we're moving on to sort of project specifications. So the way that we normally do a specification here, and we sort of run in lean startup-y sort of manner is obviously we're very close to the customer, so we don't necessarily need to do customer development at this point. But what BB was saying is very accurate in that you want to spend as much time with the customer first. And so if you can create a Google form and get data, and in fact, Drew sitting here prototyped an idea literally using a Google form, and we're going to build it out as a service in the next few weeks. But he learned a lot by making the Google form. In fact, we would have probably built it badly if he didn't do that first, prototyping it with a Google form. So if you can use a Google form or any sort of hack together technology, or a process called paper prototyping where you draw it out, work with the customer, collect data, refine what you need to do first. Then what we do to take that level of knowledge and turn it into a specification is we talk internally with stakeholders. Usually that it can be short, it can be long, it depends on, but we're going through some stakeholder meetings right now, they're long, they're a few hours each, but you collect everyone's ideas. We tend to document the collection of those ideas in a Google Doc. And in fact, we'll all have the Google Doc open at the same time as we discuss the specification and write the different requirements down. I tend to be very strict on formatting. So, title, subtitle, head, et cetera, put things in, bullet it out. Then, if in this case, BB's been in town working with us on a lot of this stuff, but a lot of times the stakeholders will talk internally and then present it to the developer externally, who will review it, fix it up with their feedback, and that will be a bit of a back and forth a couple times until we're happy with the document, at which time we start looking at how to break it into chunks, essentially sprints or phases, and get it done. I don't know if I'm missing anything there.
Yeah, with all these docs, very critical section is called definitions. Especially when you're working with brand new folks that you haven't had relationships with, it's important for you to define all your terminology, every piece of the product, what it actually means, and how the team communicates. This way, you can always come back to those definitions as you kind of build out the spec. Then, what you want to do also is have basically a section around workflow, step by step. How does this product supposed to work? You could use tools like Balsamiq and stuff like that to kind of mock it up and sketch it out and so on. This way, you can at least have a basis for a conversation, right? And then, once you have that kind of format set up, then you basically send it to the developer for comments and feedback. And then they'll probably ask you more questions that'll make you think through a lot of these other scenarios and so on. Then you make that even better with time. Once you get that to a certain point, now all of a sudden what you should do is basically you're probably going to have a list of features that you want to cover, and then you want to start to prioritize those features. And one of the things we do here is that we have very high priority items. We label them as a 1. Medium priority, we label them as a 2, and a lower priority, we do them as a 3, and then you can kind of start to stack them up. It's these are very high priority items. We can't live without them. We have to get these done, and then we start to build a schedule based on that, and then kind of keep going through the spec as well.
BB, do you want to add anything about what we just described? And then someone asked, what is the best way to split a project into smaller tasks and how to estimate them? So maybe if you want to add anything and then answer the question about breaking it into.
So I would try to break the product into independent features. So a feature which can exist by itself, being disjoint from the others.
Right.
So we can call that as an epic and start working on that. So I would say that's the best way to start breaking up a project.
So you start, so when you usually get a spec, you try and turn it into essentially features, and then try and then think about what features you can get done first, second, third.
Yes and no. Yes, in the way that yes, we look into the higher picture and try to see what we can separate. But when it comes to the development, we always try to look in terms of the customer. So what is the customer going to see? So probably there could be a workflow where we need one feature from one part from one epic, another part from another epic. So in that way, these are like interdependent. So I think essentially, when you're defining the specs, I think it makes sense to divide them into features which are independent. But when you're developing, it's best to work in terms of the customer workflow.
Right. So you try to. So let me just clarify that a little bit. So you're saying you try and do things that the customer will see first, versus things that are kind of invisible to the customer second. Okay.
Right. And then from my perspective as a product manager, what I look at is I work with BV, and BV gives me clear estimates on, okay, I think that this feature is going to take 10 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours, right? And then I use that to kind of schedule my time, and just, you always want to add more time if you want to basically make your timelines. So you want to make sure you buffer that. I usually try to, add a few hours at least, if not to try to double the amount of forecast, because you just don't know what you don't know, right? It's a software project. It's interconnected. There's a lot of dependencies, like BB said. So it's that way, at least I know that I'm going to be able to deliver stuff on time if I'm being, conservative in my estimate.
Yes, and another thing is Mike was pointing about high priority tasks, which we keep getting. Most of the times they're bugs or something which we missed earlier. So even when we are working on a feature, it's a good idea to always put aside about 10 to 20% of your time to work on these high priority items. I mean, that depends on the product and the stage of the product. But I think we put aside about 10 to 20% of the time to fix any high priority items.
So in other words, when we set up a sprint, a development sprint, let's say the sprint is a week, we'll dedicate a day to bug fixes, for example, out of that. So something like that is kind of a way to, to look at that.
All right, there's some questions coming in, and I want to just get to everyone's questions. So I'm ordering them here, and I want to try and get them in logical order. All right, so how do you go about finding a remote developer was one question, and then are there tools and resources for requests for proposals? Let's start with the finding first. I mean, there's a lot of remote developers, so there's a lot of services to find remote developers. I guess maybe that would be a great question for BB. Like, where do you find good clients, and the other way?
So fortunately, so far, most of our clients have been friends or friends of friends. So we didn't actually have to go beyond a certain level to find new people.
Right.
We are already saturated at that point of time. But at least from my perspective, it might be just me, but in my perspective, I think I didn't have to go and search for the clients. But I mean, there were so many people who were looking for developers, so that was good, because I mean, once you put up the quality.
So Mike, what would you?
There's a couple ways to go. So number one, just like anything else, you want to make sure that you're getting like what's called like a recommendation, ideally. So finding somebody who knows somebody. So your local director should be a good fit there. We here at FIHQ, we have a lot of relationships with folks. We can connect you with people that we know are pretty good. So that's your first step, right? Use the FI network as a way to find really good developers. Then there's also other tools and marketplaces like TopTal and so on, that can basically, help you,
TopTal,
TOPTAL, where they actually interview folks, right? Now, once you have a list of people that you're trying to reach, you should have a list.
I would say, okay, so let's be super precise about this. So you've got your direct research, which might be going to things like GitHub, forums, Stack Overflow, and trying to find people who have a specific skill set in your field. That's a direct outreach. Then you've got networking, which would be speaking with mentors, speaking with your directors, speaking with fellow peers in the program about people that they've used, anyone you know, maybe somewhere where you've worked. And then you've got services like TopTal, Eland, well, now it's called Upwork, So there's services where you can hire developers through, like Upwork or TopTal, and then there are services that help you find developers. So there's a variety of services that you can use as well. I would probably say, to your point, Mike, you start with networking, then maybe go direct, and then maybe go to the services, because the services are expensive. You're paying, a big markup there.
The second part of this question is the reliable. How do you find a reliable remote developer? And I think this is just as important, right? Finding leads is actually probably the easier part. So test projects, we talked about that before. You've got to start off by basically with creating some form of a test project where you're able to see. And what you're gauging for is, number one, is this person able to communicate really, really well with me? So what does that mean? That means that the developer is being proactive in asking you questions about certain features, right? Like when BV and I talk, most of it is actually initiated by him with lots of different questions. Every single morning when I wake up and I look at my Slack, there's usually 5 or 6 questions from BV that I want to answer, that I want to make sure so that he's not blocked for like the next day, for example. So you're able to kind of see if they're able to communicate well. The second thing you want to see, are they able to deliver on the milestones that they've been able to forecast? So you ask them for a forecast, and they say, I'm going to deliver this feature, this feature, this feature by next week. If they're unable to deliver those features by next week, then you've got that's a clear indicator that there's some bigger problems that will probably get compounded down the road, right? So usually you want to make sure they're able to deliver on time, and if they're unable to deliver on time, the excuse has to be like really, really good, right? Like I went in the code base, I figured these dependencies and this dependency and this dependencies, and what I've realized is that because of these dependencies, it's going to take this much more time. Like they need to be very specific and clear about why they're not able to deliver.
Keep asking the questions in the chat. So another one was, is there any tools that can help with specification or request for proposal? So is it like a proposal writing tool or a specification writing tool? Do you know of any ones?
I don't use any such tool. I have a standard template which I keep modifying for every client or proposal I have.
What do you, yeah.
I mean, it's honestly, for us, it's Google Docs. Once you have a person, the relationship's going to go.
I think they're looking more like, because they don't know how to write a spec, would be my guess, or RFP. So is there something that can help them do it?
Yeah. So, I can't think of the top of my head, but there's like basically a few blog posts on toptal.com about how to write a good spec. And how to write what are the sections that you should have in your spec in order for you to be able to get a proposal? Because basically that's how a person's going to estimate the project for you. They're going to look at your spec, they're going to give you kind of a ballpark. They're probably going to ask you some more questions, and then they're going to refine the spec. And
a request for proposal in the modern day is basically a spec.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to be like, write me an app. You got to write, because they're not going to know what it's going to take. So your spec is really what you need, and there's a lot of resources out there for just Google how to write a spec, and you can write for a mobile app, and actually you can download tons of specs. We even have a spec outline on fi.co. Another question that came in on just scheduling and forecasting is it customary for remote developers to charge an hourly fee for testing their work?
That depends actually. So what I generally do is we have a buffer set of test engineers who keep testing for whatever we do. So we don't charge for those test engineers. But it depends on what way you're trying to go. I mean, if you're trying to do write an application which also has continuous integration tests along that, then I think it makes sense to also charge for the test, because you will be charged for the test because a considerable amount of time is spent on testing. In my personal experience, if you take about 10 hours in writing a piece of code, you generally spend about 15 hours in writing tests for that piece of code. For that reason, most of the startups prefer not to have automated tests but have manual tests. So if you prefer to have automated tests, yes, you might be charged, but at a different rate compared to the developer cost. If it's manual, it's something which goes between.
In other words, it means you're going to be doing the testing. You're going to be the QA, and this is how you're going to save a lot of money. There are some cases where it makes sense to have tests, particularly if your application is live and has lots of users. And for us, because we're on 24/7, we're putting up about 100K events a year. The reliability is critical. So for us, we needed that. But that's another feature, right? That's another feature to your product. So of course, you should.
Right. And let me explain a little for those of you who are not familiar with what's being talked about here. So there's modern day application development has essentially automated testing frameworks so that you can build the test so that when you deploy, it tests everything, make sure the code runs, the data is entered correctly, blah, 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 doesn't crash, etc. Those automated testing scripts, as BB was saying, can take longer to write than the code itself, but it would possibly be a different skill set. Then you could also ask the developer just to do some basic tests. The problem with that is that a lot of times the developer don't fully understand what you want it to do. And so they've written it, so they're going to test what they wrote. It's like, oh, I wrote this, when you click the button, it should do that. Oh, look, I click the button, do this. What you're going to do is go in as a user and do the things the developer doesn't expect. So really, to Mike's point, you can ask the developer to do testing that's manual, and they may or may not charge you for that. But at the end of the day, you need to do the real testing, right? Because you're going to use it like your user and break it like your user. The developer will just test what they made. I mean, unless I'm missing something. So you really need to do the testing. Okay, let's move on. There's more and more questions coming in, which is great. Do not be shy and keep typing questions in. And Drew, if you know the name of any websites we go over, please add them. So there's some operational questions about how do you manage time zones, especially when there's a limited overlap in the day, and that is a toughie.
Why don't this actually was one of the things that ended up working out really well. So maybe you can kind of talk about how you manage that initially.
So there are a couple of things which we could do. What I usually do is I wake up very early in the morning so that there is pretty good amount of overlap. So if at least one person from the team is available for a longer overlap and he's kind of a manager for that particular project, I think that would be more than sufficient to get things done. I mean, with all the developers, you might need a little amount of overlap time, maybe half an hour, 1 hour every day.
Well, I mean, most remote developers have like a senior developer and junior developer, and the senior developer is really the person you need some amount of overlap with.
Yes.
Right? But you don't need to have overlap all day, as you said. You need 1 or 2 hours, which means even in the worst case, I mean, you're either waking up early or you're waking up early. So someone has to stay up late or wake up early, basically. Yes. Right?
Yeah.
I hope I answered the question. I mean, I don't see this as like you're chatting with the developer all day long. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are times when shit breaks, and that's not great. But do you want to maybe talk about that?
Look, set 1 hour every single day to have basically a meeting with your developer over Slack, or whatever tool you use, GChat, whatever, and that's what we do. So we have every single morning, at 9 o'clock my time, BV and I basically talk for an hour about the next day's requirements and the things that need to get done, and that's how it goes. Now if there's emergencies and things like that, then you both need to basically make things happen so you can fix that particular issue. But generally, if you're able to set up a once a day, every day type of cadence, then things are going to be moving on time, and then you're going to be very proactive rather than reacting to what's going on versus you doing this like once a week or something like that.
Another question came in, like, how do you coordinate with a developer if they do not comply with your management tools such as Trello, Zoho, or Sprints?
Well, honestly, find out also what they like to use too, right? Like, I mean, if it depends on the size of your team, right? If you're really small and you're just starting out, then it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the developer's happy and they're working really well with the tools that they have. If you are a very large team and you're bringing on a developer that's going to help your development team go a little bit faster, then they have to comply with yours, and that's how that goes.
Every developer needs to use tools.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, you have to use tools. You have to. So they're using some tools. If they're not using your tools, then maybe you need to use their tools.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, what do you do? Like, do you always use your clients' tools, or?
No, I mean, our standard tool which we use is GitHub, where we have projects also as issues.
Yeah, everybody uses GitHub that I know. It's like, I guess some people use SVN, but that's not really anymore.
It's not anymore.
Right.
So when it comes to project management, different clients use different tools, but it's not very huge number. I think 3 or 4. Few use Asana, few use Trello, and most of the people use Pivotal Tracker.
That's true.
So
a lot of people use that.
So yeah, I mean, we don't have to work with so many tools.
Is Pivotal? So what's the most popular? Pivotal Tracker.
According to me, Pivotal Tracker is very neat, and it gives clear estimates on where the project is. So
okay, and then what would be number 2?
Number 2 would be Asana or Trello. I mean, it's up to you.
Okay.
And if it's not Pivotal Tracker, it's up to you.
And then. So, I mean, if the developer is not, though, there's one thing if they're using their own tools and they're not using your tools, like tough cookies for you, maybe you should use their tools. It's another thing if they're just not being communicative in any tool, in which case you should fire them.
Right. That means that you have communication errors. The minute you start to see communication errors start to happen, that is when it's time to basically find somebody else to basically replace them.
Okay, so another question came in. The code quality of outsourced developers seems low, too much copy-paste code, hard to maintain, hard for future change. How do you handle that?
The hire was wrong.
I mean, that's definitely true. If you're able to notice that, which is really good, then you've got then that's time for you to kind of move on and replace that. It also kind of matters where you're trying to go with this product. Look, if you're building like an MVP style product, trying to kind of test the market and so on, it's okay to kind of cut and paste and it not looking great and all that. It doesn't matter because you're probably going to end up throwing away a lot of the stuff you built anyway. But if you're kind of on beyond that phase and you're on, second or third phase, fourth phase of that, iteration of that product, then at that point that starts to become a problem because it starts to slow down, a lot of the effectiveness of the code, and it's time for you to kind of move on. So, that's when, you basically have to either have a talk with them, and if they're not responsive about that, then you got to kind of move on to the next person.
I mean, you're going to have to in-source everything you do eventually, right? So everything, especially, I mean, so, okay, if you need a little piece of JavaScript that you can't write internally, yes, you can outsource that. But I'm talking about like any core product activity, you're going to have to in-source at some point. So outsourcing is always a short to medium term solution. It is not like a long-term solution per se. Like for the Founder Institute, because we're not a technology business, we do a blend of insourcing and outsourcing. But and that's okay because it's not like a core piece of our success. But if you're building like a mobile app to do transportation or whatever, and like you're outsourcing the mobile app, that's going to be a short-term solution. You're going to eventually need to insource it. Now, when you move code that's been developed outsourced to insource, a lot of it will get thrown away. I mean, just by default. Anytime you switch a developer or anything like that, there's going to be massive code changes and possibly a lot of stuff thrown away. You know, it's really, really easy to develop stuff today. So if your code isn't that complicated, throwing it away sounds horrible, but in fact, you know, it might not even be a lot of code, right, in the modern day world. And so I think you just have to be ready for that. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that. And other questions, guys, because we have some time. We want to talk about deliverables and a little bit more on testing, but don't be shy with your questions.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're going to probably be updating, you know, let's call it the foundational pieces that are holding it together, like specific frameworks and things like that. And when you do that, it means that a lot of the rest of your code is going to get updated as well. And so it's natural for that to happen. So it just really depends where you are in the process of developing the app. You know, earlier on, you're okay with poor, quote unquote, poor quality. Later on, it's you know, becomes much more vital to what you're doing.
Right.
In a general.
BB, do you want to add anything?
Nothing. That's
all right. Should we talk about deliverables, testing, and launch? So you're getting in, and does anyone else have questions? Because we're here to try and answer them and help you with the needs that you have. But, you know, we talked a little about breaking it up into sprints. You could argue that each sprint, which could be a week or 2 weeks long, is in some ways a deliverable. And then, of course, there's the bigger deliverable that a series of sprints produces. You know, maybe you could talk to us about how you think about, or either of you think about delivering this sprint and then delivering the final product. When do you worry about testing, et cetera? I'd love to hear your views.
So there are three types of tests here. I mean, generally speaking, the three types of tests as a developer. There is something called unit testing, function testing, and integration testing. Unit testing is about you have a small piece of code, you want to test the integrity of that piece of code. Functional is about how two pieces of code work together, and integration testing is about how the customer sees, and it's like the end user experience.
Right.
I mean, when it comes to startup, we generally tend to skip the functional testing, where how two pieces fit together. We make sure that the end-to-end testing is always done. So when it comes to end-to-end testing, even before we start developing, we work with the client or manager to come up with a rough end-to-end test. So we know what exactly we are going. So it could be like a user story. And then as we keep working on the product, the goal is to...
So when you say a user story, it could be just how they use the product.
Yes, I mean, these days there are tools which almost have tests like really well-written English statements. So there is something called Cucumber for that. So it does something similar where it looks like proper English story. It's like story, and that gets converted into some code-related tests behind the scenes. So it's a good idea to first start with those end-to-end tests, and your goal is to start having green ticks next to each of them as you keep working. And,
right. So, but you may not. Sorry, finish your point.
And when you're coding the internals, I mean, when you're actually writing the code, there could be some pieces of the code which are extremely critical, or very important for the business, or which are quite complicated. In that case, we make sure that there are enough unit tests to cover that piece of code to make sure this part is not broken.
So, but going back to the sprint versus final product, so the end-to-end testing that you want to go in with a little bit, I mean, my guess is they get refined as you move forward, works when most of the product's done. But at the end of any given sprint, there may not even be anything that an end user could test. It could just be a login system. So sprint one might be a login system. It's like, okay, well, we can log in, but to nothing, because there's nothing to log, nothing else besides like a form field to enter your username and password. So you can't really do end-to-end testing there. So how do you manage like these sprints with end-to-end testing and everything else?
I mean, if you are a technical, if you're an entrepreneur, you want to see some progress every week. I mean, it could be as simple as login form, but it is something which is done over the sprint, right? So we should always look for some meaningful deliverables every sprint. And that's
meaningful external deliverables that you can test?
Yes. So once again, it goes to you're trying to build something for the customer. So whatever you're doing should be customer centric. So okay, what are we doing this sprint? So customer is going to have this external feature, or he will be able to do something extra. So that is something which we need to test every sprint.
Do you want to add anything there, Mike? Does anyone else have questions, by the way?
So, from a product manager's perspective, you essentially have like two dials, right? You have like the quality dial, and then you have like the time dial, right? And so, if you're trying to reach a certain deadline with your sprint and your project, say we need to get this out in front of customers in 3 months, then you're going to have to dial down possibly the quality and possibly dial down the number of features. So I guess there's 3 dials. There's quality, there's number of features, and then there's time, right? So what you want to make sure that you do is that you're essentially kind of building the project as is. So you're working with your developer, right? And the developer says, look, and we had this the other day, right? Like it's going to take probably somewhere like 15 hours, for us to basically get this feature done, and so what do you do with that? But we need to deliver this on Friday, right? Or something like that. It was kind of the conversation we had. What do we do? Well, we could push that out to like the next sprint or potentially launch that later, right? Or, we basically wait till that's finished in order for us to launch that. And so as you get better and more experience with this, what you want to make sure that you do is essentially come back and say, okay, these are like the hypercritical things that absolutely must be in the product in order for us to launch, right? And, kind of manage backwards from there. So you have those things built out in the timeline. You think you're going to be able to deliver them by, say, March of this year. And then, as you get closer and closer, adjust accordingly in order for you to make your date. If the date is not as important, say you're okay with being March or May, then you can kind of keep those features the same. What you don't want to do, however, is continue to add features, because then, the timeline can go all the way to exponential. And this is where we see a lot of issues happening with many grads, right? Like they keep adding like features to the product, to the spec. And as a result, the project takes forever to build, right? So if you have clear communication from the beginning, if your spec is clear from the beginning, right, then you at least have a framework for you to be able to manage that, right? If you don't have clear communication from the beginning, then everything's going to get screwed up, right? So you got to make sure you do that. That's number one. Number two, remember you have like the 3 dials, right? You have like the quality, the number of features, and the amount of time, right? Adjust accordingly from there, right? And then, basically kind of drive towards the goal.
And generally, you're going to be cutting features to meet time for most of you. You'll start with a set number of features that you want, and the time will start creeping. Managing against time is probably your most important thing as a startup.
Yes.
Someone asked, please explain test and production environments. So generally speaking, I'll give an overview here. You've got 3 environments. You've got a development environment, which is where your developer codes. A lot of times you don't have access to the development environment, but sometimes you do. You're usually going to have some sort of staging environment, which is essentially like a test environment. And then you're going to have production, which is live. And almost everyone can have all 3 environments because nowadays it's just so cheap. The staging environment costs nothing because you can just put it anywhere. I don't know what your experiences are seeing it, or what's it? Do you see? Does everybody have staging environments these days?
Yes, almost everyone has staging environments.
Right. Because you're going to release incremental code. You want to put it somewhere that you can screw around with it that's not live and not on the developer's servers. So you're going to have, again, development environment, a staging environment where you test things, and then live production. Now, there's some questions about how to manage those well. I'm not going to say we're perfect, like we do database copies between them every few days to keep them up to date?
You know, just to bring this on a little bit like I guess higher level. Look, so your development environment is basically where your developers building stuff, and it's constantly just, you know, being updated probably every single day if you're running an agile team. You know, the staging environment is essentially what you use to get like external testers to use it, potentially your other employees, your co-founders, and so on to play around with the application. Production is what everybody else gets to see, right? So the way we basically deploy things is once something looks sharp in development, and usually BV and his team will test it on our end, we push it to staging. And then, you know, myself and other employees at the Founder Institute will play around with the product, with the you know, and specific features. If they check out and they're good, then we will push them over to production, and they will, you know, be able to go live with it.
Do you want to add anything, BB?
That's good. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Any other closing thoughts from you guys that you want to add? So we have a lot of people at the Founder Institute that work with remote developers, regardless of whether they have an in-house team or not. So any closing thoughts or tips? Maybe we'll start with either you or BB. BB, you want to go first?
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So look, pretty much most project management starts with very clear communication. If you do not have clear communication, you will never be able to deliver on time, right? And so make sure that when you communicate with your developers that, you know, they are able to commit to certain hard deliverables. If they're saying, no, I think it's going to take like, you know, a range, right? That's usually a red flag. Ideally, you want them to be able to have ownership and try to drive towards that specific goal. When I ask BV or anybody on his team, what do you think, how long do you think this feature is going to take? BV will flat out say 3 hours or 5 hours and so on. And then me as a product manager, I'm able to basically forecast based on that, because if you can't forecast, then you can't essentially get to where your targets are, right? And so the way I usually do it is I kind of start there. And I kind of forecast out, and then I kind of look at where my date is, and then I basically start to prioritize what features are important based on the date that we try to reach, because even for us, it's still very date driven. Like a lot of the things that we try to do must get done at a specific time. And this is especially true with bugs, right? Because they're so critical, they got to get done like right away, for example. And so then I got to move those into the pipeline. So make sure that you establish a clear communication. So when you start from the beginning, when you're starting to interview people, and you know, if you have to kind of basically figure out how good are they at communicating with you? Are they asking you questions? Are they being proactive, you know, in trying to understand things? I mean, that's going to be the most important thing. So my closing thought is make sure that you have clear communication. And look, you know, we're here to help, right? grads@fi.co. That's like a common email that my team and I check on a regular basis. Do you want to put grads@fi.co in the chat room? You know, reach out to us, right? We're here to help. You know, that's essentially what we're here for, is to help you. You know, same thing with resources. Like, say you need help finding a talented team that's been vetted by us. You know, we're able to also introduce you to some folks as well to kind of help make that happen for you, you know, as well.
Yeah, and so I'll leave you with the final point that it goes beyond the obvious that you need to be working with someone good, right? And if you're not sure if they're good, or you have doubts about the quality, then you need to move quickly and change things up. Because, you know, I see far too many people get stuck in a bad relationship, and, you know, oh, well, as soon as they deliver. You know, the problem is if it's not going well, you need to get out of it as quickly as possible, because it's very unlikely it's going to suddenly turn and they're going to deliver something good. They haven't been working. You know, hanging in there is not a strategy, right? So you need to be very mercenary in your own selection of the vendor, working with the vendor and getting good results. And if you're not getting them, you need to move on quickly.
Yeah, I got to second that. So, you know, like I said, when I started before the Founder Institute, I launched 6 different products. You know, none of them were the first developer that I ended up working with, the first remote developer that I ended up working through. You know, it was usually the second or third. And I've had similar experiences throughout my career. So it's very critical that you basically spend the time and try to work towards developing a long-term relationship with somebody that can be with you for a very long time, because you don't want to be in a situation where you have to switch developers 2 months down the line, 3 months down the line, 4 months down the line. So make sure you test them with the test project and so on to start.
Thank you, BB. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Let's do a big round of applause.
All right.
And don't be shy. grads@fi.co, everybody. And check out Founder Lab, our program to help graduates raise capital.
Yeah, founderlab.com.
All right. Bye, everybody.
See ya.